We would need music.
I have music in my head.
That does not help.
You don't like it? I have different pieces, but I felt like something lively.
It is fine. Something lively is good.
Brilliant.
Is Metallica's Ride the Lightning the best album of their career? Is it the best thrash metal album ever made? Which band member almost quit during the recording process? Also, what song does the band hate from this record? And lastly, which version of this vinyl is now considered a collectible? Stay tuned to this episode of Retro Reviews as we answer these questions. I have this very distinct memory about Ride the Lightning when everyone in high school was getting into Metallica, and I had a copy of the record at the time. A friend of mine asked to borrow this record, and of course they love Metallica too. Now I remember the next day he came back to me and he was very annoyed. I thought to myself, how can you be annoyed with this record? It's amazing. But his gripe wasn't with the record. In fact, it was only because one section of the song skipped, and to him it was such an insult to Metallica and their music that he ended up buying a new copy of the record. I remember being angry about this at the time, but looking back at it, that might have been because I knew he was a bigger Metallica fan than I was, and that's the kind of dedication you can expect from their fan base. Exactly 1 year and 1 day after the release of their debut album, Kill 'Em All, Metallica would have a sophomore effort to follow, with Ride the Lightning being released. But did you know that this record technically has two release dates? Ride the Lightning's initial release with Megaforce Records was dropped on this date. However, when Metallica would be re-signed to Elektra, the album's reissue would be on the 19th of November of the same year. Of course, the timing of this release was rather perfect because the scene was really starting to kick off, especially with releases from bands like Anthrax, Slayer, Celtic Frost, Venom, Bathory, Metal Church, Sodom and Creator. Its initial release was considered quite successful, with 85,000 copies being sold. A modest number, of course, that is a drop in the ocean for future albums that the band would do, but it would go on to sell well over 7 million copies and go 6 times platinum in America, but that was thanks to the success of Master of Puppets in the following years. And of course, in due time, keeping up with Metallica's ecstasy of platinum records that followed suit. Well, at least this record has Metallica going on their own this time. I mean, it's not like there can be any pesky Dave Mustaine comparisons like with the Kill 'Em All album. Come on now, it's the 80s era Metallica, as if there wouldn't be a Dave Mustaine writing credit on this record. After all, according to the man himself, he's written everything Metallica has ever done, past, present, and of course even unrecorded. Look, before we continue down that path, I think we should briefly mention the complexities involved in songwriting credits. The first question to answer is who can be entitled for a songwriting credit, and we can surmise this in a very, very broad statement. Whoever gets songwriting credit would be due to the contributions to the song structure, chord progressions, and lyrics. They will receive a share of the royalties earned from the song. This seems fair, right?
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Well, the history of music, law, and royalties is complicated. It's the reason why the Rolling Stones received royalties for the Verve sampling a drum beat on Bittersweet Symphony, despite the sample being from a song off one of their least successful records from the 60s. And of course, it's made up of only a portion of the song, yet they won that court case and earned lots of money. It's also why Roger Taylor from Queen receives 50% of the royalties for the Bohemian Rhapsody single, despite not having any songwriting credits on that song itself, but rather his song In Love with My Car was the B-side. How does that work out? That's why songs like Ariana Grande's 7 Rings, released in 2019, has songwriting credits to Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein, even though they'd been dead since 1979 and 1960 respectively. They were following the law, and Lars is a smart cookie when it comes to protecting his assets. The band knew the workings of the music industry, and if there was even a hint of something Dave Mustaine wrote would reappear on this record, they would of course give him credit as such, despite how major or minor that that would have been. Of course, it was to avoid lawsuits. And I don't want to discredit Dave in the long-standing feud between Metallica and Megadeth fans. Obviously, Dave can write good music, and has done so for many decades. However, most of the credit for this record should go to Cliff Burton, who taught the band music theory. While Dave may have laid some groundwork on certain tracks, such as Ride the Lightning and of course Call of Cthulhu, they were vastly improved upon by the late Cliff Burton, who would add of course his power and melody to these tunes, and transcended their original compositions. I mean, Dave Mustaine is a bit of a one-trick pony when it comes to this kind of songwriting, in that his main driving force is how fast can I play this song. I mean, he can certainly play technically aggressive guitar riffs at speed, however, so could Cliff. The added bonus was that Cliff understood there is more to music than how fast could you play, and of course incorporated it into Metallica's sound. I mean, Hangar 18 is a great tune, but it barely holds a candle to the mesmerizing Call of Cthulhu, and the vastly improved changes Cliff made for that song, as well as Kirk Hammett of course, which can't be understated. While Metallica are famous for reworking material in their songs, referred to my episode of Kill 'Em All for a few examples, what is maybe the biggest jaw-dropping moment is just how different this album could have been, given that one of the band members nearly left Metallica during this time in their history, and that member was of course James Hetfield. Although the exact reasoning is unclear, I think there are a few reasons why James nearly left the band. In fact, James had approached Armored Saints lead singer John Bush to take over his duties, which he declined because his band was doing rather well at this time, which begs the question how different things could have been if he had of course gone ahead and made this decision. Can you imagine Metallica without James? The first obstacle was when the band had their gear stolen, which left James and Lars feeling rather deflated. James would recall the ordeal and stated, "I fucking hated life. Our gear just got stolen. We can't live our dream. We're not gonna make it to Europe." This was exacerbated by the situation they found themselves in. Of course, the band eventually did make it over to Europe, and the main reason for this was because the exchange rate over there was much better for the US dollar. And that is why they chose to record all the way in, of course, a European studio. But maybe this is all exacerbated by the situation that Metallica found themselves in once they were outside of America's borders, where the band members themselves resorted to theft in order to stay alive. But the main differences lie within what they would steal. Most of the shit that they would steal was of course food. It wasn't theft for theft's sake. They would collect empty beer bottles to return for money, and of course they would sleep in the studio in order to just have a roof over their heads. But there is usually a silver lining to these clouds, and with the band forced into a record studio, they had all the access to the music they could ever dream of listening to. Also, with all their gear stolen, as mentioned before, they were forced to play on acoustic guitars for a time, which of course allowed them in turn to write the song Fade to Black. So you got to take a step back and think about this, because this is the early 80s and of course a young Metallica. A whole bunch of young and up and coming heavy metal bands, with one of them suddenly releasing a song that is a melodic piece with an acoustic opener.
What are those wooden things? Chairs?
They are acoustic instruments.
What is acoustic? Oh, you mean a grandpa's guitars?
Grandpa's guitars. That's for pussies and grandpas. I think you know it.
Secondly, when the band of course eventually did record, they did so in Denmark, and this was under the production of Flemming Rasmussen. At the time, Flemming had only worked on 2 Rainbow albums, and of course these albums were difficult to cure and bent out of shape, and this was the main reason the band chose him to produce their record, as they love these albums. But yet, Flemming had never heard of the band before. This must have been a blow to, of course, Lars's ego, but it was more so considering that it was a recent European tour that Metallica had engaged on. Regardless, it was thanks to Lars's connections inside the record industry that the band managed to secure him for this album. Most of the band would become homesick during this time, and that was because they were in culture shock during the recording, which left them rather depressed. But this is understandable given the circumstances. I mean, if you go from French fries to pickled herring, there are definitely going to be some things you're going to miss. Now, what I have to say about the production is this. I believe the producer Flemming Rasmussen was a bit green at the time. However, he was the best producer the up-and-coming band could have received. And while his input was minimal to none, it is what was required for the band at this point in their career. Clearly, Metallica came into the record studio with 1,000 ideas, and just wanted someone with recording experience to capture these songs with the best sounding. And clearly the band liked working with him, because he would also go on to become the engineer for the next 2 records with Metallica. As far as the production levels for this album, well, it's quite above the norm for what was being released at this time, but sounds somewhat dated now. And you can't help that within the record industry, it's just always going to happen. Now, a fun fact about the album, but there was also a misprint in the French vinyl editions of Ride the Lightning, which saw the album cover being done in a green tint, and around 400 copies of this were produced before the error was rectified, and of course now there are green copies of Ride the Lightning, which are considered a rare and collectible edition by Metallica fans. Depending on the condition of the vinyl, it could be worth around about $180 or more, and yes, they did the same for the cassettes, but who the hell collects cassettes anyway these days? There was only one single the band released from this album, and it was clearly an afterthought due to the success of this record, which is quite the phenomenon when you are thinking about it. Yes, this album has gone platinum 6 times, but you got to consider why it did so. It was mostly due to the fame of a different record, and of course the success that Metallica had in their later career. But that still shouldn't take away what success the band had at the time, especially considering that there was very little airplay from radio stations around about here. It was something that was just unheard of for this time, and considering the style of music, it's not really surprising at all. The lead single that Metallica chose, after all, was the song Creeping Death, which is a song written about the killing of all the firstborns, or the 10th plague of Egypt. To give you an idea on what was the top of the charts around about the time that this single was released, let's have a look at the songs that were number 1.
Who you gonna call? Ghostbusters! If it's some
Of course, Creeping Death never charted, but could you imagine if it did? Oh, the humanity! This song is also one of the few songs written by all the band members. The original title for this track was going to be Die by This Hand, and this song, according to many Metallica fans, is one of their favourite tracks to hear, especially when they join the chorus for the Die, Die, Die section. The song's eventual title would be influenced by the 1956 movie The Ten Commandments, when Lars and James saw this movie and noticed the scene where the angel of death comes forth as a green fog, and all who were caught in it falls over and dies on the spot. So this is where the words Creeping Death came from. It also contains one of Kirk Hammett's favourite guitar solos, and in 2020 it was ranked number 1 as Metallica's greatest songs. Clearly a fan favourite from this record, and it is also the second most performed Metallica song according to Setlist FM. Hey, since this song and Four Horsemen are both about religion, does this make Metallica a Christian metal band? I guess since this is a legendary album with only one single and one track the band hate, then of course that should leave a whole bunch of deep cuts left on the record, right? Well, of course, but which is the song that the band hated first? A bit of a common fact, but Escape is the song in question, which was the last track written for this album. It was meant as a more accessible song for radio airplay, but in Hammett's own words, they ignored this track along with the entire album. It's interesting to see that the band tried their hand at this before the Black Album, but of course the Black Album is the one that gets called out for the band selling out. For almost 30 years, the band would not perform this track, and when they eventually did, James introduced the song as
the song that we never wanted to play live ever.
But of course this joins a long list of Metallica songs they never want to perform live. Another aspect to consider is that if this is indeed the worst track on the album, it's still a very good song, even if the band half-assed it as a last-minute track to the record. I mean, it's certainly not Paranoid, but still. Anyway, here are the following deep cuts. Oh yes, easily the second most iconic tolling bell intro in rock and roll history, and it's also Cliff's second most iconic bass intro. Now as for the namesake of this song, it comes from the Ernest Hemingway novel of the same title, which seems to be a bit of common knowledge. However, what is little known knowledge is that he took this from a poem by John Donne written in 1623, and the poem goes as follows: "Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind, therefore said not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Of course, the song itself is a commentary about the futility of war, and even the last few lines of the song takes its cues from the book that it's based upon. According to Rasmussen, it is also the first song Metallica learned how to play to a click track, and I'm sure that there is a joke in there somewhere. Going back to the intro bells for a minute, and it's interesting to note that AC/DC's Hell's Bells uses a different sound effect for their intro, in that the sense that the band custom ordered a 1-ton bell from a foundry in order to record that one little sound. Whereas Metallica just used a sound effect reel. Also, how many other bass players learned how to play this intro when they were starting out? Because I know I certainly did. This song was mostly born out of natural necessity rather than being a song that the band of course brought into the recording studio. As I've mentioned before, the band had their equipment stolen when they were in a show in Boston. So they would have to either learn to play acoustic guitars or get a job that would earn them enough money to buy some new equipment. In fact, there is quite a glum lyric of "There is nothing more for me, need the end to set me free," which was inspired by the loss of James Hetfield's favourite guitar amp. Man. Am I right? All things considered, I would say that this song contains Metallica's best solo, and it was largely improvised when it came to the recording sessions, and this is best exemplified of course by the writing on offer for the rest of the song, as of course it is built up by the crescendo to the peak towards the end that is only helped by the acoustic sections right at the beginning. Sometimes shit happens, and life can get you down, but sometimes I feel like this song is the musical equivalent of knowing that you are the one who has to make that change in your lifestyle, and in turn make that hard choice. It's an awesome tune. It was also the song that was being performed by James when he was burned by some pyrotechnics in 1992. On top of this, it was the last song that future Metallica bassist Jason Newsted performed in 2001 before leaving the band, and was always a favourite tune of his to play.
Well, on two.
Yeah, this may seem on the nose, but once again, this song was influenced by, of course, such media. Well, not the movie obviously, this came out years later, but rather it was taken from its source, and once again is literature with Stephen King. Now, while The Green Mile is based upon a novel of the same name by the author, Ride the Lightning is based on a line from another book by him, which is called The Stand. In particular, the line, "Why then you go on to death row at a state prison and just enjoy all the good food until it's time to ride the lightning," which struck a chord with Kirk Hammett when he was reading this section of the book, despite coming up with the title for not only the album, but of course the track of the same name. Kirk does not have any songwriting credits here. Instead, his predecessor Dave Mustaine does, in his one of only 2 credits on this album. The riff in part would appear on the future Megadeth album Peace Sells, but who's buying for the song Wake Up Dead. Now, as much as we know Dave Mustaine can rock, and of course no one here is saying that Peace Sells is a bad album, but we all know who wore it better. Metallica. For a while, this song was the longest track Metallica had ever written, until they wrote To Live Is To Die, which surpassed that record in 1989. And then Outlaw Torn beat that when they broke that in 1996. And finally, Inamorata stands as the band's longest track ever recorded as of 2023. Anyway, it's pretty common knowledge amongst the metal community that this song's riff was written by Dave Mustaine, back when he was of course with the band. And the riff for this song would eventually become Hangar 18 for his song with Megadeth. But an often overlooked fact is that it was also used for the Megadeth song When from World Needs a Hero. The difference is that it didn't take Cliff 6 years to compose this tune. This song will continue the trend of having an instrumental song placed on a Metallica album, something that will continue as well for the next 2 records. The working title for this song was When Hell Freezes Over, but of course it was taken after another famous piece of literature. The Cthulhu is a mythological beast in the H.P. Lovecraft universe, and of course it is part octopus, part dragon, and part human, and is giant in size. It is said that if you glimpse upon this beast, it would drive a person insane, and I would imagine that when you are looking at the tabs for this tune, it would have the same effect. Although this song is not performed live often, it has been brought out for a few special occasions, in particular for the S&M concert, which was the first time Metallica re-performed the song in about 15 years. And it was the perfect way to kickstart that performance. Hell, it even won them an award. Quite possibly a Grammy?
Wow! An award statue! Oh, it's a Grammy. Hey, don't throw your garbage down here.
Kirk has stated that the first solo in the song was even influenced by his teachings by Yngwie Malmsteen, as they used a modal approach in the technique, along with, of course, broken arpeggios and a chromatic scale. Damn complex guitar methods. Metallica's Ride the Lightning has been met with mostly universal acclaim, with many media outlets giving high scores such as the following: AllMusic given a 5 out of 5, Chicago Times a 3 out of 4, Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal a 10 out of 10, The Guardian given a 5 out of 5, Pitchfork a 10 out of 10, Q a 4 out of 5, Rock Hard 10 out of 10, Rolling Stone magazine gave it a 4 out of 5, Sputnik Music gave a 5 out of 5, and the lowest score that I have ever seen was on the Encyclopedia of Popular Music with a 3 out of 5. Over at RachelMusic.com, the album sits with a score of 4.08 out of 5 from 37,000 reviews, which is incredible considering the amount of people that are reviewing this record. As for me, this album gets a score of 14 million chilies on the spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being Fight Fire with Fire, Ride the Lightning, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Fade to Black, Creeping Death, and Call of the Cthulhu. It's interesting because this album can determine what type of Metallica fan a person is. I know a few people who would say that this is Metallica's best album, and I understand this angle and the love and respect that it has earned over the years. Some will view this as the beginning of the holy trinity of records with subsequent releases, while others would say that this is part of a golden age of Metallica during which it was Cliff Burton's tenor. I think most people, myself included, would say that this was another subliminal Metallica record which was part of their perfect decade in music, which saw 5 records of perfection being released by the band. The question still remains, is Ride the Lightning the best album Metallica has ever written, and in turn the best thrash metal album in existence? I guess that depends on your feelings regarding the rest of their material, and if you consider it pure thrash or not. To give you a comparison, it's like if I said that Paranoid was the best heavy metal album by Black Sabbath. Do I think it's the best thrash metal album ever made? No, I think there are 1 or 2 tracks present that ruin the flow of this record on its way to perfection. Do I think it was influential? Hell yeah, because after its release, it served as the benchmark for bands in both European and, of course, American markets in both the quality of songwriting and the sound it produced. Do I think that this is Metallica's best album ever recorded? Well, the answer to this question will be addressed on a future episode of Retro Review, because, once again, there is another contender to discuss.
Told you I did. Reckless as he. Now, matches are worse.
That boy is our last hope.
No. There is another.
If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.